Hey folks, welcome back to Chris Wyatt Reports on the Adopt Africa channel. This is Chris live in central Pennsylvania as South Africa's Parliament building burns by, no, actually that's fake news. That occurred a couple years ago. And we see Dr. Corne Mulder there from the Freedom Front Plus, the whip from the Freedom Front Plus, and a member of Parliament, the longest serving member of Parliament in South Africa, with an historic photograph, one when the Parliament is actually not burning. Dr. Mulder, normally I might greet you in Afrikaans, but I'll greet you in German, since I know you know German. Servus, wie geht's?
Sehr gut, danke schön. That's sehr gut. Thank you, Chris. No, thank you very much for the opportunity. It's very good to talk to you again. And it's good to see things. And it's quite ironic that I've got the picture there of how Parliament was supposed to be. But behind you, you can see what happened to Parliament, which is absolutely a travesty and unthinkable that that could happen.
No, it is sad. And as we saw as it unfolded, closed circuit television not monitored, police not there, not the guy running around the building for hours on end. This is the state of South Africa's key infrastructure and how it's protected. I mean, you go from this to the Presidential Protection Unit, the VIP Protection Unit, either lying in their annual report through the South African Police Service or something untoward happening, because when they reported on the residences that they're responsible for protecting, they said no incidents occurred in the time period when the Pala Pala heist took place. So somebody's lying. So they're not even guarding properties where the president lives. They're not guarding the parliament. What exactly are the police and the security services guarding? I'll tell you what, if I was a South African politician, which you are, I'd be worried about my safety, because it doesn't look like these people are doing their job.
It's just, it's absolute incompetence. That's all it is. Incompetence, incompetence, incompetence. And you've got lots and lots of generals with lots and lots of big salaries, but there's no capacity to do the basic things in terms of policing. And that's part of the ANC. The ANC is a terrible organization, and the sooner we get rid of them, the better for all of us.
Well, in fact, I think they are very efficient at some things. I did see the video footage, the images of Paul Mashatile's VIP escort running South African National Defense Force trainees off the road outside Joburg, beating the living crap out of them, knocking one unconscious. And now they're in court, finally defending themselves for actions last year, saying that, well, we thought they were a threat. Really? And that authorized the use of excessive deadly force?
Absolutely, no. That's how they do these things. They're a law unto themselves, and all these protection units that go with the executive, that's exactly what they do. They push people off the roads. It's unbelievable how the ANC and the executive, they love blue lights, and it gives them some sense of importance, I think. But you cannot get any sense of importance if you're not entitled to that in any case.
Well, in fact, blue light escorts seems to be one of the desires for office for many office holders in South Africa. That sort of a privilege and perk that really is. We've seen these blue light escorts. They're often a danger to public safety, pedestrians. People have been killed from the reckless driving behavior of these people. And I saw this when I was in Liberia, when the president was driving out to the airport, and the Presidential Protection Unit, which was trained by the Americans, there's the irony, forced the commander of the United Nations military force in Liberia, UNMIL, off the road next to the Chinese-built soccer stadium right in front of me. And then the guy went out and slashed the tires with a 3-star general in there just because they weren't going fast enough. It's insane. But that's not what this conversation is about. This conversation is about South Africa's elections, May 29th this year, national, provincial, and regional. I mean, I'm confused. I go to the ballot box. I get 3 ballots handed to me. I get to mark an X on one on each of them and get to vote for folks. The Freedom Front Plus is a party that many consigned to the dustbin of history, many analysts a few years back. However, in its municipal elections, had a very strong showing, came back and made some impressive gains, I think quintupling the number of councillors you have represented in the country. Is that quintupling and your appearance on more municipality councils having an impact? Because the polls are not particularly helpful, I don't think, because people are focused on this MK party and what's going on there, the decline of the ANC. How do you feel the Freedom Front Plus is doing in the Western Cape where you're at and around the country? Do you have a sense of that? I ask you because I'm not going to get a chance to interview Dr. Groenewald this time. His schedule's just too full, and I was busy running for office and losing badly when I should have been coordinating for an interview. So he's not available. So I'm asking you because you're probably the most senior leader of the party that I'll talk to. What is your sense about about how the Freedom Front Plus is doing in the Western Cape and around the country?
I think the campaign is going very well at the moment. I think we are very well positioned. And let me just give some perspective. In South Africa, we have more than 500 political parties registered at the Electoral Commission. But of that 500, I would say 95% of them do not participate in elections. They're just registered, but it means nothing. So on the 29th of May, we will have 10 elections on the same day. Why 10 elections? It will be election for the National Parliament, consisting of 400 members. And then we will have 9 provincial elections for the 9 provinces also on the same day. So I quite often say in South Africa, I think we've got about 10 to 15 parties that I would call the A-team, meaning those are the only parties that do have the capacity to participate in all elections on polling day, on national level and in all 9 provinces. To just get your name on the ballot, you need to pay a deposit. The deposit is 750,000 rand. Then you're on the ballot. But we've been in Parliament since 1994. We've been re-elected every time. And at the moment, in terms of the campaign, I think it's going very, very well. Specifically in the Western Cape, I'm so hectic busy at the moment because the Freedom Front Plus is definitely one of the serious contenders here in the Western Cape. And just to give you some perspective, in the run-up to the 2021 local government elections, I said my target is going to be to force the Democratic Alliance into coalition governments in the Western Cape. So we've got 25 local councils in the Western Cape, and after the election, we are now in 11 of those. In coalition governments with the Democratic Alliance. So the Freedom Front Plus is no longer just an opposition party. We're also now a party of government. We've got some deputy mayors, we've got speakers, we've got councillors, etc., and we are part of that situation. And obviously, I expressed from the beginning, I said that's exactly what I now want to do. In the provincial level, I want to take the DA into a coalition in the Western Cape as well. And that is my aim in this coming election on the 29th.
And how do you think that's going? I mean, it's like I said, it's difficult with the polls. We've seen 2 polls that have really gotten people's attention in the past month. One was the Brenthurst poll initially, which showed MK, this new party, not in Western Cape, but nationally, primarily in KZN, but with like 13% support. But then the Ipsos poll came out with 8%, and now we're seeing all kinds of own goals. I mean, we've seen Jacob Zuma, who's ostensibly not even a member of the party, fire the founder, Jabulani Khumalo, who now has struck back and has suspended Jacobs. It's a dumpster fire over there, and no pun intended behind the video behind me there, the image, but a dumpster fire. So in the Western Cape, though, I mean, you've got a plethora of parties, and some of share values similar to yours. I mean, the ACDP has many of the same principles as the Freedom Front Plus. So you're in government, as you said, but there's a new party called the Referendum Party that's goal is to get like 100,000 votes to push the DA below 50% so that they have to go to the table and have a coalition at provincial level. Do you think it's a real possibility? Is that going to happen?
I think so. I think we've had an abnormal democracy in South Africa for the last 30 years, meaning having a proportional system of representation. You're not supposed to have one party that attains a majority all by themselves. In a proportional system, one party would get 35% or something, and then they say, we won the election, and then they form a coalition. We've had an abnormal situation where the ruling party had a clear majority for 30 years. And then I say, and the DA doesn't like it, but that's their problem. I say, if I don't want the ANC to govern on national level all by themselves, then I also don't want the DA to govern in the Western Cape all by themselves. I don't think that's the best form of government. I think a coalition government will be better. It will bring other views and perspectives into government. And I think that's constructive. Now, it is correct. There is the Referendum Party. We cooperate with the Referendum Party. We signed an accord with Cape Exit. The Referendum Party, the Freedom Front Plus, and Cape Exit signed a joint accord in which Cape Exit undertook to inform their support base that if they want independence and a referendum, they must go out and vote for it. And they've undertaken now to instruct, or not instruct, but to give some guidance to their members to say, you've got to vote for one of 2 parties, either Freedom Front Plus or the Referendum Party, because both of us are supporting Cape Exit. For example, on our posters, on the election posters, next to our logo, we've also got the logo of Cape Exit, to make it very clear. And some of our posters for slogans in the Western Cape says, choose freedom. kies vryheid, choose freedom. And I want to push that agenda, and we'll see how that comes out. The problem is the DA doesn't want that. And I say to the DA believes that they can, that's their perspective, they want to export the better situation in the Western Cape to the rest of South Africa. And I'm telling them you will be importing the chaos in the rest of South Africa into the Western Cape.
Well, I'd have a hard time disagreeing with that. And also, you look at the DA's manifesto and compare it to the Freedom Front Plus manifesto, which I've read. I've been reading your manifestos for well over a decade now, although that communist term disturbs me. But I mean, that's a vernacular in South Africa. You also call traffic lights robots. I'll accept that. but it is the vernacular. So the manifesto for the Freedom Front Plus, once again, is if you are an objective observer, it is the most market-friendly, the most centrist, although it is right of center, but it is right of center and not in a way that's often attributed negatively. And it also is not a party that, when the Freedom Front was first established back in the day, a party that was seen as a party for Afrikaners or Afrikaner nationalism. It seems to be, once again, a manifesto focused on free market capitalism, combating corruption, cultural protection and heritage. Those are the sort of things. It doesn't look like your manifesto, your party positions have changed much at all. You're still focused on the same things you believe that will rescue South Africa and the Western Cape.
Yes, absolutely. I think we've got a dual kind of approach. We've got the manifesto on national level, but I've got a separate manifesto in the Western Cape, for the Western Cape specifically, and that is based on the whole idea of freedom and Cape exit and the referendum, etc. And I'm pushing that agenda as well. I'm giving the electorate here an opportunity to express themselves, and we'll see what they will do. Will they do that or not? The Democratic Alliance clearly indicated that they are not in favor of that. They are in favor of devolution of some power from the ANC. But the ANC has got no inclination to devolve power to the DA. They're not going to do that. So I don't know why the DA is trying to do this, but they will not succeed. But at the moment, I think we've got a very good campaign. And the party has reached out. A couple of years ago, we did change the mission statement to say, well, we want to be the champion of minorities, all minorities in South Africa. And we do get support from other minority communities. The colored community, we've got lots of support in that community at the moment, and lots of our candidates come from that community as well. And we'll see how that plays out.
Well, in fact, that is something that I've asked the Freedom Front Plus about. I've met privately with Dr. Peter Groenewald about this, and not that I'm telling you guys how to suck eggs, but I've just asked where the party stands on this, and it's been, I believe, a goal of the party to be broader, more diverse in its voting base, and an effort's been made to recruit people from other ethnic origins and backgrounds beyond the traditional Afrikaans-speaking community to be a larger party and have a bigger impact. It sounds like that seems to still be a goal for the party and something you hope to achieve.
Yes, absolutely. You're absolutely right, Chris. And that's exactly our focus. We've realized right from the beginning, the party started off as an Afrikaner organization that focused on the Afrikaners' interest. And we are still committed to that. We are committed to self-determination. We are committed to freedom. We want to be free in Africa. But we also realize that if you want to be successful, it will assist if you get other communities to do the same and also aspire to have the same kind of approach. And we are quite happy to see how this is at the moment playing out, that other communities are also coming to the fore. We believe that we say South Africa is actually a country of minorities, but minorities that cooperate can form a new majority. And we hope that we can get to that point where we can remove the ANC from government, and that will take us to coalitions and all kinds of opportunities that will come from that.
Well, we've talked a little bit around it here just a moment ago, and let's get this, it's not an elephant in the room, but it's certainly something I'm sure people listening are curious about. And that, of course, is the Freedom Front Plus came out a while back in support of a referendum for Cape secession. That was a position that the Freedom Front Plus publicly stated. John Steenhuisen, I believe, actually said the DA would sponsor a referendum on Cape secession. This is a few years back. But to date, the DA has made no efforts, at least not publicly, to actually hold a secession referendum in the Western Cape. As a consequence, you had the Cape Party, which became the Cape Independence Party. And unfortunately for Jack Miller, that for some reason, the IEC, they're not on the ballot. So I think they're going to try to contest his write-ins, but that's not going to go very well for them. But we have all these other groups, United Liberty Alliance, the Cape Exit, the Cape Independence Advocacy Group, which is now spun off this new political party. A lot of talk about this. Let's give me a crystal ball. I'm going to jump forward. And after these elections, the DA, let's say they're in a coalition in the Western Cape and they're pushed into having this referendum of Cape secession. And let's say that 63% of people in the Western Cape who vote say we want secession. And then we begin the devolution process. In the future, would jump forward 10 years, would you anticipate the Freedom Front Plus as a political party in the Western Cape would still have some sort of relationship with the Freedom Front Plus in the rest of what's the rump of South Africa? I mean, I don't see any reason why you would divorce. You'd certainly have a relationship. What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely, I absolutely agree with that. The DA undertook to come with a referendum. There was a lot of negotiations going on from Cape Independence Advocacy Group, and there were some agreements from the Democratic Alliance. And obviously what they wanted to do is they wanted to have a multi-question referendum, because they obviously do not believe in independence. So they wanted a referendum where you have different options. Are you in favor of devolution? Are you in favor of secession? And obviously the DA hoped that secession will get no support and that their devolution will get a lot of support. But in the end, the DA reneged on their undertaking and their promise. And we know the DA, they will never do that, because the DA is a party that still thinks that they can govern South Africa. And that creates a huge problem. But when we go down this route and we go into the future and the Western Cape would become independent, then obviously we hope to be part of that government of this independent state, and we will continue a good relationship with the Freedom Front Plus and the rest of South Africa, absolutely.
Well, I think that's an important consideration for people to understand where you're coming from and where you're hoping to go with this. It is, I think, I don't know if it's fascinating, but certainly is interesting. A lot of people in the Western Cape have just given up on the concept of South Africa. They're just frustrated by ANC governance and what it's become. I mean, the ANC likes to run around and claim that it's the party that brought liberation to South Africa. That is, in my view, a wholly false statement. There are other actors who played a far greater role, and circumstances of history played a far greater role. Frankly, I think the National Party had no choice but to give up, because the end of the Soviet Union, collapse of communism, really the jig was up. Most white South Africans would not support a continued system as it was, and they had the referendum, and 62% of white South Africans said, it's time to move on, and so we went forward. But the ANC likes to claim credit as if MK was the deciding factor. It was not. The Pan-African Congress arguably had a bigger role, and we also had the Black Sash movement. We had Helen Suzman. We had international sanctions. All of these things combined, there are a lot of folks who led to South African liberation, but the ANC likes to pretend it was just them. In fact, if you go to the Apartheid Museum, although I heard it's closed in Gold Reef City, but I've been there several times, and every time I went, it became more ANC freed you. In the beginning, it was pretty honest. And in fact, they even tried to take credit for the Black Consciousness Movement, which had nothing to do with the ANC. And they claimed credit for the Freedom Charter, written in 1955, not by the ANC. They were a minor actor. It's a little frustrating, because that's the playbook they keep going to. Apartheid, Jan van Riebeck, and they're the Party of Liberation. And none of that really holds up to the scrutiny of history.
Absolutely. No, that's a problem. The ANC, ironically, their slogan in this election says, "Let's do more together." Now, suddenly they now want to do things together, and they want to do more. My response would be, please don't do anything. You've done enough. You've destroyed everything. Don't touch anything. I always say there's nothing in South Africa that the ANC has not touched that is not in need of a so-called turnaround strategy. They've destroyed everything. That is their way of doing things. But luckily, I think we are coming to the end of the ANC, and that's excellent. We need to do that. The ANC is a corrupt organization. It's a crime syndicate as far as I'm concerned. And they are incapable of doing what needs to be done. It's only for themselves. Corruption flourished under them, right from the bottom to the top of the presidency themselves. And we can't afford to have them. And luckily, there was a time, you remember, just after 1994, when South Africa and the ANC was the darling of the world. Mandela, wonderful, blah, blah, blah. But I think the tide has changed completely now, because I think the international community now realizes what the ANC is, and specifically in terms of the ANC's positioning of South Africa in international relations. We are friends with all the rogue states in the world. We want to be friends with Iran. We want to be friends with China and Russia, etc., etc. And I think the final straw was when South Africa took Israel to the International Court of Justice. I think that was an interesting move, but I don't think South Africa understood that. But that's part of the ANC. That's how they see things.
Well, the ANC took Israel to the International Court of Justice, but in 2019, when the Gambia took the historic step of using the ICJ to actually bring a case of genocide against Myanmar for its discrimination and campaign against the Rohingya Muslims, the ANC wasn't a party, not even an amicus brief as a friend of the court. They're silent. They didn't get involved. The ANC has nothing to say about the genocide against the Uyghurs in China, another Muslim minority. The ANC has nothing to say about the RSF, the Rapid Support Forces, and their fight against General al-Burhan in Sudan and the 5.5 million people currently displaced as a consequence of that conflict that started a year ago. They have nothing to say about the Sahel, Niger, Mauritania, Mali, Burkina Faso. They're silent on Somalia. All of these are much closer to home, and I'm maybe a little slow, but I think most of those places are pretty much occupied by Black Africans. So if they care about Black Africans and Pan-Africanism and genocide and, where's the ANC? And where's Naledi Pandor?
No, they only care about themselves, and they, as I've said, they are positioning themselves with all the rogues in the world. They feel quite comfortable with Iran, with all the rogue states, but they want investments from the West and the United States. And that's why the ANC is, you cannot redeem the ANC. You can only get rid of them. There's nothing that you can do to make them change and to become better. Sometimes people will say, no, but there's the good part of the ANC. And I will say, well, where? Whom? What is that? There's nothing there. The sooner we get the ANC completely out of government, the better.
Well, let me go this focus very quickly here. Now, you are, if I'm not mistaken, the Freedom Front Plus's candidate for Premier of the Western Cape, a position currently occupied by Alan Winde. Do you envision because you're not going to get a majority? Let's be honest. We're not going to. There's no way that Freedom Front Plus or ACDP or the EFF or the ANC are going to get a majority in the Western Cape. So, if there is a coalition government with the DA, do you envision a possibility that your party would be able to negotiate and you could become the Premier in a coalition with the DA?
Well, it's not impossible. The fact is, if you look at the Western Cape legislature, it's got 42 seats. And at the moment, the DA governs with 24. So if they lose 3 seats, it's a 21-21, 50-50 split. And I think it's most likely that they will lose 3 seats. They will lose more than 3 seats because the Patriotic Alliance with Gayton McKenzie is making huge inroads in their traditional coloured base. We are making inroads in their other bases as well and their coloured base. And then there are other parties, New Kids on the Block, Action SA, Rise Mzansi, BOSA, a number of other parties. So I think it's most likely that the DA may end up in a coalition in the Western Cape. And we've expressed ourselves right from the beginning. We will be part of that coalition because we will make sure that under no circumstances the ANC or the EFF could come into government in the Western Cape. The ANC and the EFF is not really a factor in the Western Cape. The DFs from time to time use them to scare the electorate, try and force people to get them to vote for the DA. But it's scare tactics because the ANC and the EFF is no factor in the Western Cape.
Well, I that's a good analysis. I'd have to agree with that. So, the ANC has really, as you mentioned, lining up with the rogues gallery of axis of evil here, of states that are not part of the international norm. They're trying to form a bulwark against the international system as exists today. And the ANC seems to be thumbing its nose at its benefactors, at its donors. And just for the sake of the audience here, the United States is South Africa's historical largest trading partner. Although China eclipsed us a few years ago, we're now number 2, but we still represent 1/5 of trade with South Africa, about 22% of all its trade. And South Africa is also a recipient of Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, duty-free access to our marketplace to the tune of nearly $3 billion of duty-free goods coming into America every year, wine, BMW parts, things like that. Unfortunately, not enough good biltong. I wish there'd be more. And then also South Africa is a major recipient of the President's Emergency Program for AIDS Relief, which is supposed to be an emergency program, but here we are 2 decades later still doling out money for HIV when other governments haven't picked it up. But the point I'm getting at is that the ANC seems to be fond of thumbing its nose. The Lady R incident in Simonstown which in my view, the report from the government was not independent, and it was not objective, and it was also not something that I think any of us believed coming from the government, saying that nothing untoward happened there. They couldn't explain the vehicles with plates associated with the South African National Defense Force who were there, BMWs and other vehicles there, the crates being offloaded in the dark when people, anyway, so the Lady R incident, Cyril Ramaphosa running around, and South Africa not pushing its pharmaceutical industry like Aspen Pharmacare to get involved in developing vaccines for the jab. They didn't do that. They joined the COVAX scheme from the United Nations and left others to do the work. And then Ramaphosa running around crying vaccine apartheid, attacking the very countries who created these things. Look, I'm not in favor of this jab. I'm just saying that that's the reality of what happened. And then a naval exercise off the coast with the Chinese and Russians, while Russia's engaged in a conflict with Ukraine, and South Africa abstaining when the United Nations General Assembly voted overwhelmingly to condemn Russia. The list goes on and on here. It's almost as if the ANC is going, how else can we piss off the Americans? What are we going to do today? I mean, and a lot of South Africans, when I make these comments, they assume I'm doing it from a biased position. No, that's an objective analysis of what's happened here. I don't care if the ANC doesn't want to go. I don't get any benefit from it. None whatsoever. I don't buy much South African wine, and I don't own a BMW, so you're not going to increase the prices of my goods here. You get the benefit. You get the jobs in Port Elizabeth. You get the jobs in Western Cape because you can send your goods here on a more competitive basis than German wines or German BMW parts, yada, yada, yada. So my point, and it seems like I'm going a long time here, is that it seems as if the ANC, in an effort to please Tehran and Moscow and Beijing, have thrown their lot in against the West, who are their primary benefactors and who most of their trade occurs with. Although China is the biggest trading partner, the West is the biggest block of trade with South Africa. This seems like a very foolhardy and self-defeating foreign policy. But then look, Naledi Pandor is your foreign minister, so I guess that's all I need to say.
Exactly. She's absolutely committed with Hamas and the Palestinians, and that's where she positions herself all the time. And South Africa is exactly positioning ourselves every time on the wrong side of history. So what we hope to achieve is, with the Multi-Party Charter, if we could form a government, obviously we will steer our international relations towards where it should be, towards the West, towards the United States, etc., because we think that is where we should go. And I think that is how it will play out.
Well, you mentioned the Multi-Party Charter. I was going to get to that. I was there. I was there at I started to say Gold Reef City, but at OR Tambo in the Emperor's Palace when this was Kempton Park, when this thing was actually negotiated out, the final negotiations and the public announcement. I was there with the South African. By the way, not impressed by most of the journalists in South Africa. Talk about lazy, whiny, not particularly well-educated crowd. I was astounded at some of the questions that the journalist had there. But I was at that event and got a chance to interview John Steenhuisen, Dr. Kenneth Mswe, or Reverend Kenneth Mswe, Peter Groenewald, and a host of others, including Christopher Claassen from the SMP, and of course Neil de Beer. The Multi-Party Charter isn't an alliance or coalition. It's an agreement to work together to get rid of the ANC. I think people have been lost on that point. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the purpose of the charter is to work together to get enough votes to get rid of the ANC, Fotsek ANC, and there has been negotiations about what comes next. Can we work together in a coalition government? But it is not an alliance of sorts, and I think that's important. Neil de Beer made that distinction, saying that while we're doing this, we're trying to get rid of the ANC. That doesn't mean that we agree on everything.
Correct. It's a pre-election agreement between different political parties that cooperate on a joint vision, on joint principles, on joint priorities, etc., and to try and get sufficient votes that we can afterwards form a coalition government and keep the ANC out of government. And by doing that, we are trying to send a message that we cooperate. And the message to the electorate is you can vote for the party of your choice as long as you know that your party is part of the Multi-Party Charter and that they will try to form that coalition government afterwards, and let's see how it plays out.
Well, I don't know to be excited for South Africa or terrified. I've looked at the numbers, and unless the ANC is driven down below, now I don't know if you know this, but in November of 2021, after the municipal elections, I made a prediction, and my prediction was that the ANC, this is before load shedding occurred every day and before the MK was formed. I didn't know that was going to happen in November of 2021, but I've stuck by my analysis based on what I'm seeing in historical trends and what I expect. I said the ANC will not get more than 42%. Could go as low as 38%, and I will pray that they get to 33%. But if the ANC is able to stay above 40%, it's a grim outlook. They're might be able to cobble together some of these other parties that have self-interest. And there's three things that politicians around the world and political parties seem to be interested in, particularly political parties: craving political power, self-interest, and self-aggrandizement. And my concern is that if the ANC if it isn't driven below 40%, that there'll be an ANC coalition where they'll be able to get away with what they want. I imagine that your hope is that they're also driven below 40%, and there can be a coalition of the MPC as a basis and going from there.
Yes, no, your analysis is absolutely correct. It's difficult to predict where the ANC will go and in terms of their support base, but it's quite clear that they are having huge problems at the moment in terms of support. And MK is a different factor. It's an unfortunate factor in the sense it seems that Zuma is maybe succeeding in getting people who supports the ANC technically and who are opting not to participate anymore and to stay out of politics. But it seems that he is now in the process of getting them to vote. And the information I have is that Zuma would like to go into a coalition with the ANC and to assist the ANC to become a government again with MK. But there's a condition: Cyril Ramaphosa cannot be the president.
Well, that doesn't surprise me. Despite the fact that there doesn't seem to be anyone else on the bench, he's not exactly a popular person and has not been a popular person. If you go back to the party conference in November of 2017, when he just beat out Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma, a thoroughly unpopular individual abroad and in South Africa, but he only beat her by 35 votes. But there's who's on their bench. I mean, their vice president's accused of nonsense. Their former secretary general's accused of nonsense. The former health minister's accused of nonsense. The list goes on and on. It's like a rogues gallery of accused criminals, none of whom are being prosecuted.
That's the ANC. That's all of them. All of them are involved, and nobody gets prosecuted, and they just go on. And if somebody is doing something wrong, then they are just redeployed to another position, and they continue as is, and that's how the ANC operates. But at the moment, it seems that they would like to get rid of Ramaphosa. He's the draw card for the ANC. If he's not there, they will do even worse. But hopefully we can get the ANC to as low down as possible, and then we can try. And interesting, there was some time not too long ago that the ANC would not speak one word about coalitions because they will govern until Jesus comes. That's what they said. Now suddenly they're starting to talk about coalitions, but now obviously from the ANC's perspective, the Deputy President started the process, and they wanted to come with legislation that says the biggest party must be part of a coalition. Try to force, and that's a way to try and force themselves back into government. But what they don't understand, if they've got 42%, there's no reason why the other 58% cannot come together and form a government and put them in opposition, and I think that's most likely that could happen.
Well, I remember the ANC saying that repeatedly they would rule until Jesus comes. Maybe I should sell all my stock and prep for the second coming. It's around the corner here. It's right around the corner. My goodness. Yeah, listen, we could talk all day about the reprobates, but I did want to cover one more thing and give an example here of how there's no punishment. Dr. Zweli Mkhize was the Minister of Health, and the Special Investigating Unit, which doesn't prosecute, unlike the Scorpions, which had the ability to prosecute, investigate, and prosecute. Special Investigating Unit, the Hawks, said that he's guilty. They have the evidence he's guilty of corruption. He and his family profiting from the Digital Vibes contract, and he was simply resigning as health minister. But he still sits in Parliament. He votes. He's one of your colleagues. He remains in Parliament. And there's never been a criminal investigation, to my knowledge, into that Digital Vibes.
Absolutely. That's the ANC's way of doing things. They are not committed to any clean governance or anything in that resort. And as a matter of fact, Mkhize's name is suddenly now being mentioned again as a possible presidential candidate. It's him and Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma, all the rogues are coming back for another situation. But hopefully the electorate will assist, and we can kick the ANC to where they should be, on the curb, out of all political power.
Well, there's a question in the chat, and I haven't had a chance to get to any questions yet, but let me get to this one. But folks, before I get to the question, you're listening to Chris Wyatt Reports on the Dab Africa channel. My guest this evening is Dr. Corne Mulder, a member of Parliament, Chief Whip for the Freedom Front Plus, and a candidate for Premier of the Western Cape. We're discussing South Africa's 2024 elections on May 29th, just around the corner. And fingers crossed, as we say in German, ich drücke die Daumen, hoping that my passport gets back to me from the passport agency in time for me to get on a bird and fly to South Africa to cover the elections. But if not, I'll be doing it from here, which will be a little disappointing because it's going to be a momentous event and a very crazy day, to say the least. I'm not going to predict that it's going to be like 1994. That's not going to ever happen again, that kind of turnout. But does the Freedom Front Plus have an idea of what they expect turnout will be? It may just be a crapshoot. Maybe you have analysts looking at this, and you have a goal and a hope. Sometimes smaller parties hope for a low turnout so that their base comes out and the numbers are better represented. Sometimes smaller parties who are new, like for instance, probably Action SA is hoping for a bigger turnout as they draw people out. What are your expectations or hopes for the Freedom Front Plus as far as voter turnout, maybe in the Western Cape and nationally?
I think our support base will turn out and they will go and vote. I think our people are motivated and they are quite enthusiastic to get out there. And I expect a good turnout from our support base, and that's very important. Overall, I think the percentage poll will most likely be in the upper 60s, which is quite high. But I think it's the most contested election since 1994. Everybody knows there's something in the air, there's change in the air, and everybody realizes that. And after the election, we are going to sit with the results. I saw on the news tonight, earlier tonight, the Electoral Commission says they think they'll be able to make the announcement on the results on the 2nd of June, which is the Sunday after the Wednesday's poll. And at the moment when that happens, we'll have the figures on the table, and we can then see what is possible in terms of formations. How can we form governments or not? Most likely we will end up with coalition governments, I believe, in KZN, in Gauteng, and in the Western Cape. And if that's the case, and the ANC is out of government in all three of those, that's the economic heartland of South Africa, those three provinces. So it will have a huge impact in terms of that. And then obviously in 2 years' time, in 2026, we've got local government elections again. And I think we can then also consolidate in terms of the metros and those kind of things, and kick the ANC out everywhere.
Well, that's been my analysis for some time here. The ANC will not win the Western Cape, even if the DA is forced into coalition. They're going to lose KZN. They are going to lose KZN. And that was my prediction even before MK came about. The question is, how well does the IFP do? How well does the DA do? The DA has actually been gaining ground in KZN quietly. Not many people are noticing that. I don't know if it's a consequence of people just frustrated with the ANC, or maybe people are paying a little bit of attention to Chris Pappas and what's happening in Umgeni. I'm not sure. One of the better run metros in all of South Africa. Honestly, I've been there several times and I've seen the changes each time I go. Well done by the DA. I will toot their horn on that one. And then Gauteng, yeah, they nearly lost it last time. They will lose it this time. The ANC will not have a majority in any of those provinces, and all three are likely to be governed by opposition coalition, or maybe the DA in Western Cape outright if they're successful. Yeah, so I agree with that 100%. It is interesting that people still vote for the African National Congress. I mean, what more do you need to be convinced? I mean, people can roll out this tired Jan van Riebeck and apartheid and, historically disadvantaged. You can roll those stories out forever. But at what point do you take responsibility for your own failures? If we go back 20 years ago, Eskom, while I'm opposed to state-owned entities, I find them, an abomination. They should not compete with the private sector. The government never does anything best, except maybe national defense, and sometimes that's questionable. But Eskom, I would have privatized it, broken it apart 30 years ago. But Eskom, despite the fact it was state-owned enterprise and run by apparatchiks appointed by the ANC, 2 decades ago was voted the best public utility on the planet. On the planet. And today, what was 52 gigawatts of installed capacity is down into the 40s technically, but on a daily basis, they're lucky to pump out 22 to 28 gigawatts of power per day. And the only reason you're not in load shedding now is because we can't burn diesel fast enough until the election. But of course, the electric slide minister, you can do it. It's electric. That's Constitucio Ramacopa. It said that it's not because of the election. No. It's because we've improved our load availability factor. Well, one of the reasons your load availability factor is improved is because people have left the grid. They've given up. They've gone and put solar and other means in to produce their own electricity because you're so unreliable. I mean, the fact that people cannot divorce themselves from the ANC and its reputation and look at the ANC and its results is disheartening. Is that something that plays out in the Western Cape? Do you see that?
Not in the Western Cape so much. I think the ANC is in disarray in the Western Cape. They don't have good structures. They don't have good leadership. They've got all kinds of problems in the Western Cape specifically. What we've seen with the ANC is once they lose power, they don't know how to play an opposition role. Once they lose power, they disintegrate. We saw that in Cape Town Metro when they lost power there. We saw that in the Western Cape as a province and in other local councils. So they don't know how to be a good opposition, and there's nothing then that motivates them, because they need to be in power so that they can have contracts and all those kind of things. And once they are out of power, they just simply collapse. So that is good. The problem to a certain extent is with the broad electorate out there is these social grants. And obviously the ANC makes it a point to intimidate people and to say, well, if you don't vote for the ANC, you will lose your grant. Now, the irony is exactly the opposite. If the ANC stays in power, there will not be economic growth and money to pay grants. You need to get the ANC out of government so that you can get the economy growing, so that you can look at social services, etc.
Well, that actually isn't ironic. It's a lie. First off, the ANC doesn't give grants to anybody. They can't even pay their own bills. They owed 102 million rand to a marketing company, and they tried to fight them for 3 years and not pay it. And finally, the sheriff went to their offices to tally the assets at Latuli House, and then magically they came up with 102 million rand, and then had a 20 million rand party for the 112th anniversary in Nelspruit. And wonder, anyway, I'm not going to go into that story. We've covered that before. But the point here is that the ANC is not the grantor of these social grants. The grantor is the taxpayer through the parliament. And all these parties are in parliament, and most of these parties have voted for these things in the budget over and over again. So the ANC is lying to voters, and this is, I'm going to make a criticism, but I'm not on the ground, so it may not be fair, but I'm going to argue that for the past several years, opposition parties have not done enough to make it clear that the money doesn't come from the ANC. Look at them. They can't even pay their staff. I mean, I think the advert makes its own, put it up there. ANC, the sheriff comes to repossess their assets, yet they claim they're paying you SASA grants. No, the taxpayer does. Anyway, my point is that, not a criticism against the Freedom Front Plus particularly, but I think opposition has done a poor job letting people know that actually the ANC has crippled the economy and we don't have the money to pay these grants. And if you let us grow the economy, life would be better.
Absolutely. I absolutely agree. Opposition parties should do much more in getting that kind of message across and to communicate with the electorate. But sometimes political parties are so busy internally that they forget the bigger picture and to get the message out.
Well, and that leads to the next question for you here. Let's have some good thoughts here about the Freedom Front Plus in this election. Let's say you go from your previous toll, which I think was about 2.5% in the election, and you jump up, say you doubled or something like that. Do you have the structures and people in place, the quality people in place? You can fill those slots with good people to govern?
Yeah, no doubt. We've started now to become part of government, as I've said, in local government elections, and on provincial level, the same will happen. We will be part of the coalition in Gauteng, and I hope in the Western Cape as well. And we've got people there with qualifications and experience that can move into those roles. So I'm optimistic that would be the case. And if we go to 4% or maybe more, I don't know, we've got the people and the candidates to play our role. And that's the interesting thing. If you talk about smaller parties or not smaller parties, I always make the point, I say, unless you are a majority on your own, you are also a smaller party. You're just a bigger, smaller party. Because if you can't form a majority on your own, you're also not a big party.
No, you can have 38%, but it don't mean squat if you can't rule. You're in opposition. So let me put this to you and get your thoughts, because, and the reason I asked the question whether you have the people is because the ANC did something in the interest of service delivery, which was very insidious, and I pointed it out in the 1990s when it occurred. The ANC amalgamated hundreds of municipalities and towns into super megapolises of sorts, so that you have Joburg that covers all these places that used to be little towns and had their own councils. And then what they did with that is that they robbed small opposition parties of opportunities to govern and to develop experience in local councilors and at the provincial level and at the national level. Because let's face it, not everybody is well prepared to be a representative in government and represent the people the first time out. And some people, it's good for them to be seasoned at the lower level on a city council or something like that. But by amalgamating and incorporating all these places in the interest of service delivery, which was nonsense. It's about consolidating political power because they knew they would outnumber people with the mass of their voters in the urban centers. What they've done is they've robbed opposition parties for decades of a chance to build a successful bench and serve in government. That's a complaint I've had about the system in South Africa for a long time. Do you think that's an accurate statement? And how have you been able to overcome that? Because until the last election, you didn't have many people sitting in government. So are you drawing on people who have business experience and other sectors of society so that they can be the right people?
Yes, we do. The problem with the creation of local government as these conglomerates, we believe in the whole idea of subsidiarity, which says government as close as possible to the people, to the lowest level, and inform and empower the community themselves. But the ANC has created these conglomerates where they've got huge local governments and there's no financial base whatsoever. And then this is just a pirate ship for rogues and crime and all kinds of corruption kind of things. But from our perspective, we do get, as the party is growing at the moment, and I've got no doubt, let me give you an example. In the 2019 election, in the Western Cape, for example, I had to struggle to be participating in some of the debates which happened during the election. I can assure you I am now involved in each and every debate over and over again. And the Freedom Front Plus is always in the A team or the first panel, where we've got about 5 parties that participate: Democratic Alliance, Freedom Front Plus, ANC, and some of these parties. So the party has made some serious inroads. And I think we've also succeeded in getting the message across that the Freedom Front Plus has been perceived as a stable, reliable coalition partner, a party that you can count on, that we will do the right thing in the best interest of society and communities. And I think that pays dividends, because the electorate out there supports that kind of thing. They want to try and make things work, and we assist in that.
Well, let's jump forward once again here. Okay, so the ANC's out of power at the national level. They're unable to form a coalition in the 14 days the Constitution requires, which is a ridiculously short period of time, by the way, in a parliamentary system. It should be 30 days minimum. But anyway, let's just go with that. And let's say that the baseline of the Multi-Party Charter, that group, at least most of those group, and some other parties come to the fold, you get 50+1. Now, I know it's difficult to make this claim. You can only speak on behalf of the Freedom Front Plus because different parties will have different views. But would one of your goals or some of your goals be to scrap this entire nonsense with expropriation without compensation, dismiss that, and possibly, as we're seeing that Ramaphosa is about to sign the National Health Initiative, which will destroy South Africa's economy, to get rid of that? Is that accurate? Would that be objectives for your party at the national level? And what other immediate things? Because South Africa is truly collapsing, and something must be done to arrest the decline.
That's absolutely correct. We will immediately get going on those kind of things, because it's not that difficult to implement best international practice. If you want to do what is the best kind of approach to get your economy growing, there are so many examples out there. You can just go have a look and start to implement those kind of things. And one of the basic things, obviously, if you want to be a successful country and a successful economy, is guaranteed property and ownership. There's no way that you can ever be in a position where you can expropriate people's property. It's absurd. And you will sort that kind of things out. The same with the national health. It's a socialist nonsense, which is not going to assist. And then obviously we will have to get policies implemented in terms of getting the economy growing. The Multiparty Charter group is in favor of a much smaller government, because we want less government and not more government. We need small government. And we need to get policies there that will assist and allow private sector to basically play their role in creating jobs. I sat in Parliament on some occasions when State Department would appear in front of committee, and then the ANC would ask the officials of the department, so how many new jobs did you create in the department? Now that's not job creation, that's just a dishing out of taxpayers' money. It means nothing. But that's the ANC's perspective, because they do not know how to create jobs. Now they try to create jobs in civil service, etc., but it's a fundamental difference of how we see the economy and how we see what needs to be done. I believe the Multiparty Charter group of parties are all parties that understand free market, capitalist, that kind of approach, and we will turn South Africa around. And I'm convinced that there will be huge support from international community to assist such a new government to try and get them to change things around and to get the ANC out.
Well, I always find it comical when governments talk about creating jobs, or Joe Biden claims credit for creating jobs. The government doesn't create jobs. Putting jobs into government ministries robs the private sector and taxpayers of their resources, and those who have the entrepreneurialism and the drive to create jobs can no longer do it. It's a huge drag on the economy. Government doesn't create jobs. Those are make work things. A government that's lean and thin is much better. It's something else. Now, there's another problem with South Africa, which isn't really brought up very often. I think the referendum party may have addressed this. And this is something that I find bizarre, because as a commissioned officer in the military in charge of multi-million-dollar and billion-dollar programs, I every year had to submit a lifestyle audit of every single holding, every single bank account, which is quite intrusive and time consuming, but I had to do it every single year when I was in a position where I could influence anything. This seems to be something that South African politicians are afraid of or are not willing to do. Now, my lifestyle audit wasn't made public, but it was reviewed internally by the government to make sure there's nothing untoward going on there. And given the fact that I had the highest level of security clearance, it was probably also a good thing for them to do that, to see if I had any undue affluence, and I might be getting bought off by the Chinese or something like that. But that's not something that seems to be playing very loudly in South Africa. I know the ANC doesn't want lifestyle audits. If they do, the game is over.
The president has, on numerous occasions, about 5 years ago, made huge announcements about lifestyle audits. Nothing happened, never implemented. He's not going to do that. The ANC do not like to ask uncomfortable questions, and they don't want to get uncomfortable answers, and they will never take any uncomfortable steps. They protect each other. It's a crime syndicate.
Pala pala. Yeah, I mean, I don't know how we don't have an investigation into customs violations and currency law violations. If I brought $580,000 in a suitcase to South Africa, I would be in jail right now, even if it was my money and nothing untoward was happening, because it's a violation. You have to declare that money. Yet we're supposed to buy this story that a supposed Sudanese businessman who owns no land, no ranches anywhere, flew to South Africa, went to the game ranch, and carried $580,000 with him and bought 2 cattle, and then didn't sign a contract for their maintenance, their upkeep, their veterinary bills. Yeah, this seems pretty improbable.
That whole story is just a ruse to basically create a scenario to try and explain to give some explanation, but everybody knows it's a lie.
Absolutely, and that's the saddest part. And people still go to the polls and vote for Mynheer Pala Pala. That's what I call him, by the way, Mynheer Pala Pala.
Yes.
Yeah. So you've been there. You've done it all. Look, I'm on record as saying I'm not a fan of lifetime politicians, but there are exceptions. Institutions do need people who are gray beards. You don't have a beard, but I'll call you a gray beard. Who are gray beards, who have the institutional knowledge. For instance, in America, we frequently talk about term limits. And I said, term limits are fine, but you have to be very careful. You can't make them so short that there's no institutional knowledge from a politician, because what happens is then the bureaucracy runs the country, not the legislators. So you've been in there. You were in Parliament before the end of apartheid, so you've seen it all. Is there anything in this time that convinces you that we've got a chance to save South Africa? I mean, you've seen it go from one swing to the other.
No, absolutely. I was in Parliament for 6 years before 1994, and I saw the transition when the National Party basically capitulated. I saw the ANC come to power, and I hope to be there when the ANC loses power soon. Then I've achieved my mission. And secondly, obviously, I believe in freedom. That's why the party says we are the Freedom Front Plus. I want to be free. I want to take our own decisions. Democracy, at the moment, we do not have democracy in South Africa. It's a tyranny of the majority. One person, one vote in South Africa didn't bring democracy in that instance. And unfortunately, I hope that if we can get rid of the ANC, we can start to move South Africa also constitutionally in a much better direction to create a federal state where we can have more powers. And there's no reason why the provinces should all have the same powers. If the Western Cape is entitled to have more, let's go down that route. And in the end, if South Africa, if the Titanic sinks, I'm not going down with the Titanic. With all due respect, the Western Cape will do our own thing. And we are very well positioned. I always say in South Africa, the future, as far as I'm concerned, is not north and east. It is south and west. And if you take the Western Cape, we should couple up with the Northern Cape, Namibia, and we are very well positioned in that instance towards the United States in the west, towards Western Europe, etc., etc. And then time will tell how we get to that point.
Well, that raises a whole other question here. We'll go back to Cape Secession. If that were ever to happen, there are people in the Northern Cape and Eastern Cape saying, hey, what about us? What about us? I don't know how that would play out. The Eastern Cape is overwhelmingly a stronghold of the ANC, so maybe that's not viable. Even today, it being one of the poorest places in South Africa, people still vote for the ANC. Northern Cape, maybe a little more viable, maybe more possible for that sparsely populated region to become part of an independent Cape. I'm not sure, but I'm certain, because I've talked to these different groups, that that's part of the consideration here going forward if in fact there becomes a Western Cape. And a lot of people are always like, they bring this stupid roadblocks like, well, what about security? What about borders? What about this? UNR infrastructure. Ladies and gentlemen, we've seen this happen before. Czechoslovakia devolved into the Czech Republic and Slovakia. We've seen countries with a velvet divorce before. It can be done. That's not the question. The question is whether politically people are willing to do it. But what are your thoughts on the other parts of what historically were the Cape Province?
Well, if you look at the southern part of the Eastern Cape, south from Port Elizabeth, that is very much like the Western Cape. That section of the Eastern Cape could become part. The northern part of the Eastern Cape, former Transkei and Ciskei, is completely different, and that shouldn't be part of that. And then the Northern Cape as well. So we'll see how that develops. But I've got no doubt. Sometimes people will say, but the ANC will not allow that. And then I say, but you don't understand. I'm not going to ask them. We don't have to ask them anything. We can just do it. Create the reality and continue. And luckily, the ANC is so inept and so useless that they don't have the capacity to prevent this. There's no capacity whatsoever. It's the will of the people. If the people in the Western Cape can understand that they can achieve that kind of thing. And then obviously quite often people are so naive. But what about the rest of South Africa, blah, blah, blah. With all due respect, if you don't do what we need to do and create a modern pro-Western state in the Western Cape, in the end, we will all just be swept aside by just another black dictatorship in the end. It's going to develop in that direction in the rest of the country, so we know that.
Well, before we wrap up here, I'll give you a chance to give final comments. But before we do, I want to quote Tokyo Sexwally, who was campaigning Ekerhuleni in Gauteng. He said, we're here to campaign for the ANC and not to decampaign anyone. We are here to decampaign lack of water for our food, potholes, poverty, and a campaign for the success of this country to be rebuilt. Disclaimer, proudly brought to you by the ANC. Anyway, we are here to say to South Africans, fellow members of the ANC and members of the alliance, that would be the tripartite alliance at large, we are bending our knees in front of our people. We promise them a better life, not because we said so in 1994, but because the ANC is renewing itself, and we want to reconstruct the country that we've destroyed. The wheels have not fallen off. The screws are loose, but this wagon, this vehicle of the ANC is still moving. Our people still I love the focus on our people, as if not everybody's South African, still have a belief in what the ANC can achieve with them and for them. We still have our wheels. We're just here to tighten them up. I mean, this is absolutely bat crap bonkers crazy. I mean, potholes, load shedding, water shedding, crime, rape, gender-based violence, deindustrialization, criminal alien invasion of the borders of the country, proudly brought to you by the African National Congress. Not Jan van Riebeck, not Hendrik Verwoerd, not John Forster, but the ANC is the party responsible for this demise of South Africa. Let me get your reaction to Tokyo Sexwale's comments, another person who's benefited from handouts given away to politically connected elites tied to the ANC. I'll let you comment on that, and then we'll get back to your final comments.
Yeah, sure. No, you're absolutely right. There's no reason why anyone should give the ANC another chance. They've had their chance. They've been governing for 30 years. They couldn't make a success of South Africa. On the contrary, they've destroyed everything. South Africa became the laughingstock of the world. We are again a pariah state now under the ANC. Even in the African context, we are not. There's no economic growth. We are a corrupt place. We are crime-ridden, and that's all courtesy of the ANC. So there's no redemption for the ANC. The only thing that needs to be done is the ANC needs to be kicked out in totality. And that's what we are working for, and I believe we will succeed in doing that.
Well, Dr. Mulder, it's been a while since you and I had a chance to chat, and I don't think we've actually ever met in person, to be honest. I'm trying to remember. I don't think we have. But if my passport gets through in time and I come there, I know you'll be busy for the elections, but if not, then maybe post-election, maybe we can meet, have a coffee or something like that. I know that Dr. Groenewald always tries to make time for me, so maybe I get a chance to do that. But I want to give you a chance for final thoughts on the election and make the pitch for why people should go to the polls on May 29th, get those 3 ballots, which are confusing, and mark your X on that for them Freedom Front Plus. Why should they do that? I'll give you a chance to wrap it up, and I want to thank you for coming on.
Thank you very much. Let me try to explain quickly. We've got 3 ballots, as you correctly point out. The first 2 ballots are there to elect the 400 members of the National Parliament, and the third ballot is for the provincial legislature in the Western Cape. And I always say you've got to vote on all 3 ballots for the Western Cape, for the Freedom Front Plus in the Western Cape on the third ballot, and also for the National Parliament here in Cape Town. The Freedom Front Plus is a party that has been seen as a serious contender. We are an 8-team party right from 1994. We've been, at the moment, we are on national level, and we are also represented in 8 of the 9 provinces. We are represented in all metros. And we are in a number of coalition governments all through the country. I believe that after the election, we will also be represented in KZN. And then we will be everywhere in South Africa. So the party is absolutely growing. And because of the expansion of our base, we are really getting more and more support. So I think it's a wonderful opportunity. And we will become part of government in different coalition governments. And luckily, we've got a very good track record as a reliable party that you can trust.
Well, Dr. Corne Mulder, the longest-serving member of South Africa's parliament, and a man who remembers the building behind him when it looked like that, not when it looked like what I'm looking at behind me. But let me ask one more question. Sorry, I just can't help with this. My last visit now is it's been a few months. I wasn't able to get there in January because I ran for office and lost badly, by the way. But I wasn't able to make my South Africa trip. But when I was last fall, summer for you guys, I was at the Parliament building, and I still saw that it appeared no effort had been done to rehabilitate the building. Has any work begun on Parliament building to rebuild it, reconstruct it, or is it still just sitting out there?
They've started to remove the rubble and stuff inside at last, and all kinds of plans and new projects have been approved. Technically, it's supposed to be concluded by December of 2025. With a new building, etc., and a complete change around. But I'm not optimistic that they will make that deadline of December 2025. I think it's unlikely. But it's unthinkable that you could allow a parliament. It's like Congress being burned down in the United States. It's unthinkable, but it's just part of the incompetence of the ANC.
100%. We have had the White House burned down, but that's when the Brits invaded and we kicked them back out. We kicked them back out. Anyway, yeah. Dr. Corne Mulder, bye donkey. Thank you for your time. It's been a real pleasure. I'll let you drop off and then I'll close up the broadcast. And best of luck in the May 29th election.
Thank you, Chris. Vielen Dank. Thank you. Good night.
Mitfignugen. Well, folks, Dr. Corne Mulder from the Freedom Front Plus, I hope you found that informative and insightful. I enjoyed that conversation, and it's been a long day for me broadcasting. I'm done broadcasting for the day, but still plenty going on. My day doesn't end until about 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time tonight. Tomorrow on Rugby Ascendant, it'll be the Stormers on the road in Wales, in Newport, taking on the Dragons, and the Stormers must win this game and win it decisively with a bonus point. And then also tomorrow, I'll be on Ronaldo Chus program, Wednesdays with the Colonel on a Friday, since we weren't able to do it Wednesday or Thursday. So thanks a lot for your patronage. We'll see you later on. And for those who've caught my videos on the Lady Pandor and my video on Shell and what's happening with the Tebe Investment Corporation and the Batu Batu Trust, thank you very much. Those videos are doing well. I wish they do better, but they're doing well. And thank you to my guest, Dr. Mulder. Appreciate it. Always a pleasure. Whenever I hear the name Mulder, I think of the X-Files, Mulder and Scully. Anyway, thanks a lot, everybody. It's always a pleasure. Take care of yourselves, and we'll catch you here, well, the next time. Take care. God bless. Cheers. Well, that's the wrong one. Here we go.